Molly here. Today we are going to discuss the Stranger Things Netflix series. Instead of doing a recap, we are just going to jump right in, assuming that you have seen at least some of the series, probably all of the series by now. And we're going to do this with a slightly different perspective, because at the time that these kids were supposed to be growing up in Hawkins, Indiana, the old man actually was growing up in Indiana. And he definitely has a few things to say about the portrayal in the series. Be aware, we will not be showing any images for this. This is strictly a podcast today. So just be aware of that going in. So, here we go.
Yeah, specifically, this was a response after watching the series finale that we did last night and watching the whole season 5 that we've been watching over the past month or so. I guess it started before Thanksgiving or on Thanksgiving, whenever that first volume was released. And I liked the Stranger Things show when it first came out in 2016, I think it was. It really captured that 80s Goonies Stand By Me type thing. And the mystery they were trying to figure out, that upside down evil entity, it was very non-localized. It was like this larger force that was coming in. And as Molly mentioned, I was born in Indiana and I lived the first 34 years of my life in Indiana. Specifically, I lived during the time that the show was supposed to be set in Indiana. And I was pretty close to Steve and Nancy's age when this series was happening. So I think I can evaluate it from that perspective. And for the most part, season 1 captured probably not just Indiana, but like any smallish little town in the United States. Season 1 did a pretty decent job capturing that. And this was supposed to be set in, was that 1983 was the first season? 83, 84, I guess it went over into 84. And I felt it did a pretty decent job there, but like I said, I think it captured it anywhere in the U.S. Molly did a little bit of research, and I don't think the Duffer Brothers have any ties to Indiana, do they?
No. Actually, this was supposed to be based on Durham, North Carolina, where they are from. And they just chose Indiana because they thought it would be a cleaner location.
It was filmed in Georgia, so it wasn't filmed in Indiana, but set in Indiana.
Yes. And I think the research that I did, they referenced films like Breaking Away and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Those were 2 films set in Indiana.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps the attitude was that Indiana could just be molded into whatever they wanted it to be, which is kind of insulting because I spent about 20 years myself living in Indiana, not at the same time that the show was supposed to take place. After that, as we know, I'm a little bit younger than the old man. But I also had some problems with how they portrayed Indiana in the show. And I wish they'd watched Breaking Away maybe a few more times to get a better idea. Or, you know what, actually visit the place. Because, you know, in some areas, things are still pretty much the same. The people tend to still be the same. One of the things that really stuck out to me was, especially after the so-called earthquake, I'm surprised that there weren't any ministers around who were talking about ministering to people, giving them comfort, or even talking about the end of days. Religion is a big part of Hoosier life.
It was back then especially. It's a little bit less prominent now, but I guess to give a little geography lesson for those who aren't from Indiana. So the largest city in Indiana is Indianapolis, and it's roughly in the center of the state. And then there's several medium to smallish cities. Some of those are Fort Wayne, Terre Haute, South Bend, Lafayette, Muncie. And then there's a third tier of cities that are probably towns at this point, that are where Hawkins should be. And it's that third tier that we're talking about here. And going down to the medium and then the smaller cities, Indianapolis was still is, but it didn't have as much religion into day-to-day's activity. But when you started getting down to the medium cities like a Fort Wayne or a South Bend, there were pockets of major religion going on in those cities, especially in the 80s. And then you get down to the towns, and life there is when I mean religion, I'm talking some form of Christianity is the majority of what's going on there. And I would have expected, like Molly mentioned, that there would have been priests, if we're talking the Catholics up in South Bend, or ministers, if we're talking some of the Protestant-y areas that are toward the other parts of the state. And I would have expected that to have been going on. Unfortunately, scaring people with this is the end of days. And the closest they got to that sort of mentality was like when those jocks were going around and trying to find Eddie and blame him. That's kind of what would have happened, I think, but not all religious people are like that. I mean, I grew up in a Roman Catholic upbringing, and not all Christians were like that in Indiana. In fact, a lot of them followed what they believed. So,
well, I think a lot of them, there would have been a lot more praying going on.
Yeah.
And I didn't see any of that, like really almost none. I'm trying to remember, there was a little bit mentioned in that town meeting, but not nearly to the extent that I would have expected. So that was a bit jarring. And
this would have played into the fact, it would have gave more meaning to why Will was, as he was figuring out that he was gay, why he was keeping it such a secret. Because in Indiana in the 80s, that was not an easy place to live. But what it turned into toward the end here, and somebody, I don't want to take credit for this because somebody mentioned it online, is the location they were at the end of season 5 there when they were doing all this stuff, it was like they were in 2025 Portland. It didn't feel like 1980s Indiana, and I know it because I lived in 1980s Indiana.
To me, Hawkins always struck me as on the same size level as like a Bedford or Martinsville or a Paoli or something, a Rushville, something like that.
Yep.
A smaller area, whereas, not the size of like a Bloomington or, Bloomington's a different story because there's a college there, so there's an artificial inflation of the population.
I think without the university, it might have been the size of a Bloomington.
Yeah. But I always thought that, places like Columbus and Fort Wayne, that would be bigger than what Hawkins should have been, or appeared to be based on what the town square looked like. And it always seemed weird to me, how in the hell did they have a double-decker mall in little old Hawkins?
Yeah, because
I do not understand that.
Kokomo seems like it would be too big for Hawkins, and they have a mall, or they had a mall.
Yeah, but it wasn't a 2-story mall like this one was.
It wasn't a nice mall like this, no.
With a huge atrium in the... no.
That mall that they were at in, season 3?
Yeah.
That seemed like that was in, a major city.
Yes.
Like, that would be in Indianapolis.
Yes.
Maybe South Bend, because South Bend had 2 multi-floored malls, but it didn't feel like South Bend, because South Bend's where the University of Notre Dame is at in Indiana, and it didn't feel like a South Bend.
No, so it really had a very schizophrenic feeling as far as how big Hawkins was supposed to be. Because if Hawkins was the size of, say, South Bend, or like a Lafayette or someplace like that, and they had this double-decker mall, I just do not see how that Hawkins Police Department, I don't see how they could exist the way that they were. With basically Hopper and 2 officers, and that was it. There's just no way. That is more like you would see in someplace much, much smaller than that.
Yep.
Like really minuscule.
Now, should that really matter in judging the series? And the answer is no. This was basically set in Anywhere, USA, some small town somewhere, and they picked Indiana, I guess, because of weird stuff that happened. Like they mentioned Close Encounters, or like in the 90s they had, I think it was the 90s, the Erie, Indiana, where there was weird stuff happening in Indiana. So I just think they picked Indiana because it is an odd kind of place. I'm from there, and us Hoosiers can be very odd people, but we're very nice people, but we're odd people.
Well, it definitely will give you an interesting backdrop, with the quarries, and, you've got a national forest there. Just real, John Mellencamp kind of small town, Jack and Diane kind of thing going on. And so I can see why somebody would want to set a story there. I mean, I lived there myself for 20 years. I think one of the things that really offended me, though, was at the end where you had Jonathan and you had Nancy and Robin and Steve, and they were all on the roof of the radio station. Aside from Steve, the others, they were very happy to not be in Indiana anymore.
Yeah.
And then you had Hopper and Joyce talking about leaving as well. And I can see maybe if you put that in the context of, too much has happened, kind of like when Joyce packed up and moved to California. Like, why would you want to live in that house anymore or be around the place where your son was kidnapped? I can understand that.
How did those kids move like that? I got the impression, again, I'm guessing here, but I think Dustin, I'm imagining he went down to IU for his schooling. That's just a guess. Jonathan went to NYU. Where did he get that money? Growing up in Indiana like I did, I had a friend who was an art student, and he went to Purdue in West Lafayette because that's what we could afford. That's most middle-class families in Indiana. The schooling system there, you were either a Purdue or an IU or occasionally Ball State. But that was your big ones, and Notre Dame was for the rich kids to go to. So Jonathan should have went to IU or Purdue to pursue his art degree, at least bachelor's-wise, and then maybe he could have, for his master's, moved off to New York. But everybody else moved away and did something, and it's like, where did you get the money to do that? I mean, my experience has been, usually after high school, you were around Indiana for a while. In my case, you went through a university system for 4 years, and then you decided what you wanted to do after that. And Dustin was taking the route that I think the rest of them should have taken as well. A normal family. I guess Nancy did come across like she was a little bit better off money-wise, but Jonathan came from poor setup there.
Oh, so I don't think Lonnie was going to be coughing up money for college.
No, so I mean, he would have went to IU or Purdue to pursue his art degree at first.
Or even Ball State.
Or Ball State. Those are little things, but just that ending there, that sappy ending when they were on the roof talking, and then Steve was coach and I guess a teacher. Steve seemed to have the more realistic of what I would expect a small town, especially from Indiana, but even any small town person to be doing. And those that wanted to pursue college, they would, but they do it in-state because in-state rates are so much cheaper even back then than out-of-state rates.
I question, to be a high school teacher, even if it's just sex ed and health like Steve was teaching, wouldn't he have needed a bachelor's degree?
I would have thought so.
I would have thought so, too.
But they played Steve off. I want to get into a little bit, when we're done here, just a little bit about the series and what went wrong for me, not just this season, but throughout the run. But Steve graduated, and he ended up working at that ice cream place, and then later on that video store. He didn't seem to have, he was kind of chatting up those two girls at the ice cream shop about, I'm going to go to Purdue next year or whatever. I took a year off. But I think the impression we were supposed to take away from that is that he was just giving them whatever they wanted to hear so that he could get in their good graces.
Yeah, from what I remember, I think his dad refused to pay for him to go to college and screw around or something like that. So that's why Steve was there, I guess, trying to
save up college money?
Or prove himself to his dad. Well, because his family clearly had a lot of money. Wasn't that a BMW that he crashed?
Yeah, and that pool. They had a pool to boot.
Yeah, so I think that was...
The pool where Barb disappeared.
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with Steve having to prove himself to his father that he actually was serious. But yeah, how did he get a teaching job without a college degree, just a bachelor's degree, even back then?
And to me, this is indicative of what went wrong with this series for me. If anybody out there likes this series and liked the finale, power to you. I'm not trying to talk you out of it. This is just my personal take on this, and Molly will share her take. But the series started out in season 1, and it had a really good small-town USA vibe. I could even believe it was in Indiana. They did a great job with that. Season 2 mostly stayed in that same feeling, so I was okay with that. But starting with season 3, this is where I started having a problem with the show. Because to me, the show started out as a show for everybody. It attracted us Gen Xers because it was set during a time that we grew up in. And I think it attracted both younger males and females, millennials, and maybe even early Gen Zs back at 2016 for just being young people. But starting in season 3 with Elle, and then they introduced Max, but then they took Max and went from I can hang out with the boys and do stuff. Then she started hanging out with Elle, and it felt to me like it started turning into a girl brand in season 3. And by the end, where we're at now, like, I feel this was a girl brand. This was something that I would expect to be on the Hallmark Channel or something, because it didn't feel, as a dude, like I wanted to watch much that was in here. I mean, nothing against it. I know Molly watches Call the Midwife, and that seems like a fine show, well acted, but it doesn't interest me.
Oh, it's definitely a woman's show.
And
definitely a woman's show.
That's what Stranger Things to me in the past few seasons, 2 seasons for sure, probably the last 3 seasons, felt like a girl brand to me. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, hey, go for it. But it's not the same show that it started out, where it was appealing to everybody, the people who go watch Goonies or E.T. or Stand By Me. I would argue those kind of leaned to male audiences anyway back in the 80s.
Yeah, but you know what? I watched those too. It was an adventure. It was a group of friends. And when I was a kid, I had both guy friends and girlfriends. So this notion that you can only hang out with your own sex, that's stupid. And it certainly doesn't reflect what my childhood was like. Yes, it really felt like they took a series that was supposed to be about 4 boys and a girl, and they turned it into a bunch of girl bosses and the boys just standing around being secondary characters in their own story.
Jonathan and Steve, toward the end of this series, all they did was talk about, I like Nancy, no, I like Nancy. All it was relationship stuff about Nancy. They really didn't offer anything of their own to do. Well,
they should put a reverse Bechdel test on them.
Yeah.
Are these 2 men talking about anything other than a woman? And the answer was no. And that is supposed to be the hallmark of when it's bad writing, when you've got 2 women who do nothing but talk about a man. Come on, people. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So what the hell?
And what they did to Nancy, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've seen season 1, so somebody correct me if I'm misremembering. But I thought in season 1, there was a setup where they were going to catch one of those demi-dogs or whatever they're called. And they had access to a gun, Steve and Nancy. And the question was, well, who's going to shoot the gun? And I think Nancy, like her dad or somebody, like went on hunting trips, or somehow she had a history of firing a gun.
I thought she learned at summer camp.
Was it summer camp?
I thought so, but I could be remembering a different show.
So she had a history of shooting a gun, so it made sense. Okay, Steve took the bat with the nails hanging out of it, and then she would take the gun. I had no problem with that. I would not even have a problem with, as the series went on, if Nancy started, let's say, hanging out with Hopper more because she wanted to learn more about firearms and she wanted to get really good at firearms. I would have no problem with that because organically that would make sense.
Why weren't they training all of those kids to fight?
Well, in the early seasons, they were just still kids. I don't think they...
This was season 5.
Right now, but I'm arguing at the very beginning. Season 1 is when Nancy first picked up the gun.
True, but those boys were 12 years old at that point in time, I think.
But I guess what I'm saying with Nancy is, had she gone through a path where it made sense, where she picked up the skills to get really good at firearms, I would be okay with that. But it just seems she just kind of naturally, just every season she got more and more badass with weapons for what I couldn't figure out to be any particular reason other than that's what they wanted her to do.
Well, I think they were all training up until the beginning of season 5. Remember, Elle was going through all that training and everything like that.
That was just
the obstacle course.
That was just her, though. I mean, was Nancy going?
I thought Nancy was out shooting stuff, but like I said, at the same time, why weren't all those kids doing that? And I think the answer is so that Nancy could have the spotlight as is this crack shot. And
she wasn't just a crack shot. Like, if she was a sharpshooter...
No, she was like some sort of Rambo.
She was like Rambo. And it got annoying. I mean, there's the concept, out there about girl bosses, and Nancy became one, and she didn't start out that way. She was actually... I liked her character. Even when that second season, when her and... I think it was the second season, when her and Jonathan worked at the newspaper, I liked her character then. And then somewhere, again, like in season 3, is when I started just forming a dislike for some of these characters. Because the show was changing what it was doing. At first, I didn't like Max, but then I started liking Max, thinking, well, she was going to be part of the 4-party group. But then in season 3, they broke off into girls versus boys, and it turned into some other show. At the end of this series, this show was not about those 4 boys and Elle anymore. Honestly, I don't even know what the show was at the end there, but it wasn't the show about those 4 boys and Elle. I don't know. They had all these extra characters. Robin, I put up with her when she was introduced in season 3 because her and Steve had some interesting energy. But then in season 4, when they started introducing all this girlfriend stuff, and it's like, what is this, a CW show? Like the old school CW shows? What are you doing here? Is this one of those CW superhero shows where all they do is talk about their feelings? Because after a while, I got sick of Robin. Robin and her girlfriend, I could not tolerate. They just annoyed the crap out of me. Max, after a while, annoyed the crap out of me. In fact, at the end of the series, Hopper, Joyce, and possibly Dustin are the only 3 characters I liked coming out of this series. And that's not good. I even started turning on Elle after a while. How do you take a series and you actively make me dislike the characters? This reminded me of the rebooted Ronald D. Moore Battlestar Galactica. Because at first I liked all those characters in that miniseries, and by that finale, I disliked every single one of those characters.
Well, the writers systematically destroy them.
Speaking of that era, this finale, if I had to say what does it remind me of, not story-wise, just what they did to the series, this reminds me, if anybody remembers the finale to Lost. That disappointing, well, it's not purgatory. The writers said at a conference sometime it wasn't purgatory, but anybody who watched that show knew it was purgatory. And there were so many things that were lost here, like Vecna. When they introduced him, I was okay with it at first because this wasn't the face of the Mind Flayer. It was going to be something like somebody that was being manipulated, kind of like Will was being manipulated by the Mind Flayer. But it turned into basically, he seemed like he was the big baddie. He was. They introduced some throwaway dialogue about, oh, I don't control it. It doesn't control me, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, when Vecna died, the Mind Flayer died. And just going into that whole idea, I guess we should stop and go back here a little bit. So, nowhere did they do a good explanation in this series to explain what happened to Henry and how this whole darkness happened to find Hawkins, Indiana. And you had to watch this play, Broadway play, London play. It was only playing in those 2 cities, by the way, New York City and London, called The First Shadow, that had to do with Henry and how he got dragged into this whole thing. So I guess we'll share that. I don't know, Molly, do you want to explain it or do you want me to explain it? How this whole thing got started?
I will explain. However, honestly, at this point, the way that it ended, it didn't really matter. And that's the worst part of all. They gave us all this backstory, and it made 0 difference.
Yeah, because that's another thing, too. So many people online were having fun theorizing. There were many good theories out there. Some of them actually well thought out. It's showing how all the Easter eggs were lining up for this conclusion. And they had to have been disappointed when they got to this, because all those Easter eggs meant nothing. Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, because the thing is that, and I didn't realize this until quite recently, actually, when I read about the play, since we can't go see it because we live nowhere near New York City or London, nor do we have the money to go watch a stupid play. Anyway, the point is that I didn't realize how entrenched this show was in urban legends. And it seems that the basis now, based on what the play established, is that this is in the Philadelphia experiment urban legend that allegedly Brenner's father was the captain on the USS Eldridge that was used in the Philadelphia experiment.
Was he the captain or just a sailor?
I thought it said he was the captain.
Okay.
Of course, I haven't seen the play, so I'm just going with what I read online. But they were trying to basically make the ship invisible to radar. And when they did the experiment, it actually got thrown into a different dimension where the crew was killed by what essentially turns out to be a bunch of demodogs. So I guess the captain is the only one who survives. He comes back, but his blood has changed, so he can't take any blood transfusions. And he tells Brenner, his son, on his deathbed, that he went to Dimension X. Then he dies, and Brenner is obsessed with Dimension X.
And Dimension X seems to be what they're calling the Abyss in the TV series.
Yes. So Brenner, also known as Papa, he is trying to get back to Dimension X. Apparently he's obsessed with it. And he's also involved with MK Ultra. I don't know how this happened because it's kind of murky on some of this, but at some point, young Henry is in some caves in Nevada.
I think a worker that worked at that lab that was doing the MK Ultra experiments, he stole some equipment.
Was that MK Ultra or was that experiments involving Dimension X? See, that's. I think this was a Dimension X thing.
I think you're right. I think it was a Dimension. They kind of merged after a while, but I think you're right. I think it was a Dimension X experiment. One of the lab technicians stole some equipment that allowed traveling to Dimension X, or at least it allowed some way to get there.
Yeah. There was a piece of what looked like a rock, a glowing rock, in a briefcase, and anyway, the technician, he's all paranoid. Henry is in his little Cub Scout uniform. He just wants to help this guy, and the guy shoots him in the hand, and then Henry picks up a rock and beats the guy what appears to be to death. But he wasn't dead. Henry takes the briefcase from this guy, opens it up, and he touches the glowing rock, and he gets infected. And I have a feeling this was probably a piece of maybe the USS Eldridge.
I thought the play actually mentioned that he traveled back to Dimension X. But
that's what the play established?
The TV series made it seem like that was not the case, that he just touched something that got him infected.
And he got infected. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe he traveled there in his mind when he got infected. I don't know. But in the series, that's what they showed, was that he touched the rock and he got infected. And then it turns out this lab tech isn't dead. He's telling Henry he's got to fight the thing, and then the darkness will consume him. But instead, Henry just lifts his hand and then basically explodes the guy's eyes and kills him. Which would lead you to believe that it was the thing possessing him, because he seemed quite horrified by what had happened. And this was the one memory that was beyond that cave that he just wouldn't go in. So it terrified him. He didn't want to think about what happened in there. So anyway, apparently he uses his powers to hurt somebody in Nevada, and so that's when the family packs up and moves to Indiana. I'm not clear on exactly how this happened. For some reason, he starts doing shenanigans in Indiana, so then his parents take him to see Dr. Brenner, who's working on MK Ultra, and it's at that point that Dr. Brenner apparently finds out that Henry allegedly traveled to Dimension X. This is back in the play. They didn't actually show this in the finale here. So then I guess Dr. Brenner determines that I guess he just wanted Henry's powers, or he wanted to go to dimension. I don't know. I mean, it obviously didn't see the play, just read about it online. So I'm not really sure what happened there. It
kind of seemed to me that somehow he got tied into that MK Ultra program, which was essentially not only trying to build psychic weapons, I guess we'll say, but, you know, basically wanting to monetize that for whatever reason. And how that tied into his dad's legacy, I guess we'll say, I don't know, other than maybe he saw the MK Ultra program was the only way to fund his research, but it was completely unclear how that works.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe he came up. I don't remember when MK Ultra actually started, but I think, and I don't know, I think 1959 is when Henry and Brenner came in contact with each other. I'm not sure, but it's possible, at least this is what I'm trying to come up with in my head to try to justify all of this, is that once Brenner got his hands on Henry, that he wanted to use Henry's blood to do the MK Ultra experiments.
To actually get his unit of weapons that he could use for whatever reason.
Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking. It wasn't established in the show or in the play. Again, I haven't seen the play, so I can't say. But that's what I'm piecing together, because otherwise, to me, it just doesn't make any sense.
Which the TV series didn't offer even that explanation.
Yeah. But again, how unlucky that his parents moved to Hawkins and somehow got in touch with Dr. Brenner. That seems a little bit weird of a coinky-dink to me, but whatever.
Because part of it was initially, I thought Brenner followed him to the family to Hawkins, Indiana, and then just coincidentally set up a lab there. But it's like, yeah, that's a lot of work to set up just for, and then kind of MK Ultra got involved. Like, I don't know how all that worked. Yeah,
it seemed like just too much. Again, this is one of my complaints. Sometimes writers try to go too big and try to take too many threads, and you can't weave them all together. It just doesn't work. There's too many. And I think this may have been one of those times.
Well, this is the part that bothers me too, is I'm not going to weigh in on that coming out scene, whether that was good or bad. I have an opinion, but I don't think it's relevant to my opinion on this thing here. But the Duffer Brothers stated that was the most writing effort they put into any scene in the series. And even if that scene was done well, if you think it was done well, fantastic, whatever works for you. But was that really the most important scene in this entire 5-year show? Because if it was, what is this show about? Does the Henry stuff even matter? If that's the most important scene that you spent all your time on filming, I think it was a 12-hour film. They filmed it for 12 hours. They said they put the most effort in writing that scene. And what did that have to do with the story itself? It had a tangential reasoning that Will had to stop hiding a piece of who he was so Vecna couldn't get into his mind and take advantage of him. But was that really the most important scene? Was that really such a pivotal thing? How important was Will to this 5-year story? He was important when he got captured. They made him somewhat important at the end here. But it seems like this was supposed to be Elle's story.
Well, and also, I guess I will critique the scene a little bit myself. In 1980s Indiana, late 80s Indiana, I wasn't there at that point. I was there later than that, in the mid to late 90s. I would have thought that town would have been a little bit more religiously conservative.
Which would have fit in. That's what I was saying earlier. I did live during that time in Indiana, and that would have been the worry about coming out. Why are you nervous about coming out? Because in a lot of these conservative Christian households, they were disowning their kids because being gay was an abomination according to their religion. Like, just by being gay, you're an abomination. It doesn't matter that you're my son. And I think that would have factored into why Will didn't want to come out. I don't know if that got conveyed very well, because in 2016, 2018, 2022, whenever these different seasons were, they didn't make it really clear that he was for sure until, was it him and Mike had that discussion on the rainy porch in season 4? I think it was 4, maybe 3. But that could have been useful here to give weight to why this was such a big deal, Will telling people about this, because in conservative Indiana, that would have been a big deal. He would have been ostracized by relatives and some friends. And they didn't factor that all in. This just felt like it was set when they dealt with this topic. It felt like it was set in 21st century Portland.
And granted, in season 1, they did the adults, because Joyce said, well, Lonnie basically calls the kid, a not nice name for being gay. And then Hopper asked her, well, is he? So it was slightly addressed in that first season.
But back then, I'm not trying to defend the way this is done, but back then, kids used that slur to just make fun of other kids, whether it was meant something bigger or not.
Right. So there wasn't any kind of religious component to it or anything, no real conservative ideals or anything like that. It was just a very more like a bullying thing than it was a way of viewing the world, if that makes sense.
Or even calling Will out as actually gay. Those kids calling him that, it's not clear in that first season if that was just those kids, because I grew up in that era. Kids called each other that name if you didn't catch the baseball when you were playing street ball. They'd call you that name. It didn't mean anything as far as what it means in the series now, but that's just a general slur that they use, like dumbass. They just use that slur. The kids don't think about what they're saying.
And I think that comes back to the fact that you would not be able to make a culturally accurate portrayal of what life was like back then. You wouldn't be able to make that now because it would be considered to be offensive to modern sensibilities. And it's like, well, if you're not going to do it right, then don't do it at all, because you're creating this alternate history of what really happened. And that bothers me. I like accuracy, especially when you're portraying how things were, because for a lot of people, that's the only taste of something that they're ever going to get. So if you show them something that's not accurate, they're going to get the wrong idea.
And the only reason I'm stating this, if this would have been set in a different state at that time period, I didn't grow up in those states, so I would just be kind of like, okay, maybe it worked that way there. But I did grow up in Indiana, lived there for 3 decades. I was about that age. Well, I was that age of Nancy and Steve within a couple of years of what they were. So I know what kids did during that era. I know how this should have worked, and this was not accurate to what it was like in Indiana.
Well, especially in Indiana, because I know one of the big things about Indiana in that point in time was HIV, AIDS, and Ryan White. Ryan White was a huge specter in Indiana at that point in time, especially when it came to AIDS and, unfortunately, the gay community. And if you're not familiar with who Ryan White is, he was a young boy who was a hemophiliac who received a tainted blood transfusion that had HIV, and he developed full-blown AIDS, and he died. So people were very angry that this child, through no fault of his own, contracted AIDS through a blood transfusion because, obviously it came from somebody who was HIV positive. And at that point in time in the 80s, everybody blamed the gays. When the reality is...
You caught the gay is essentially how they were treating it.
Yeah. And it's ironic that yesterday Magic Johnson was the Grand Marshal for the Rose Parade. And he definitely did not get HIV from being with other men. Yeah, there was a lot of false information that was spread, and it's probably why things got treated the way that they did, why things spread the way that they did, because they weren't being honest with, at that point in time, who was actually contracting the disease.
That's not to say there weren't enlightened parts of Indiana, but Hawkins, Indiana would not have been one of those enlightened cities.
No, because I went to college in Indiana, and it would have been not quite a decade after this show ended. one of my housemates that I lived with when I was in college, he came out and he was nervous. And, I think he tested it out on us, his housemates first, because he was really nervous about coming out to his mom. Who, I'm just going to say this, he was black. So, again, the religious conservatism at the time made things more difficult, especially if you're in the black community at that point, because he was raised by his mama and he wasn't sure how she was going to take it.
And that's the part that was missing from this series to make it feel like Indiana, was the religious part. And I didn't want them portraying religion like those jocks that were going on a witch hunt. I don't mean like that. But had they had done a thoughtful study of what religion is in these smaller Indiana towns, and they could have made this a much more interesting storyline when it came to Will and what Will was dealing with.
Well, you can't do that, though, when you're looking down at those very people who hold those values. When you look down on those values, you're not going to be able to accurately assess what those people are like or what would have happened. You just can't. And again, we're going from 2020's sensibilities and we're trying to put those same values on 1980s small town Indiana, and it's just not going to work.
And the reason that it bothers me is because they went out of the way in that first season to set this series to make it feel like a 1980s small town. And I'm saying, because I'm from Indiana, it would have been nice for it to feel like a 1980s Indiana small town. Maybe if you're not from Indiana, you can go, okay, this is pretty good. It was pretty good in places of the series, but it didn't feel as accurate as it could be, especially later on in the series when they brought this Will storyline up. And there was that missing piece of, where's this religious piece? In a small town like that, it absolutely should be there. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
It felt like it was California placed in something they're calling Indiana. Because maybe that's how in California people came out in the 1980s. I don't know, but that's not how Indiana worked. Anyway, let's not spend all our time here. So, another one of the things that disappointed me was in that first season, the Upside Down was this spooky, kind of very hard to describe place.
It was mysterious.
And later on in season 2, I think it was, is when the Mind Flayer was brought in there, and that smoky spider-looking thing on the horizon, that was a really, really scary thing. And then when they introduced Vecna in season 4, and it turns out that they essentially were giving a singular individual voice to this darkness, it reminded me, and I've talked about this a couple of times on the channel, back in Star Trek The Next Generation days when they had the Borg, and the Borg, when they were initially introduced in The Next Generation, were this leaderless society. They were all, I guess we'll say, peers. And that's why they chose Jean-Luc Picard to be their voice, because they knew the citizens of the Federation that they were trying to conquer, they couldn't communicate easily to them because the citizens couldn't understand a concept of like a collective voice, a singular, there's no singular spot to talk to. So that's why they channeled it through Jean-Luc Picard. But then in the 90s, they introduced this Borg Queen, and they retconned how the Borg work. And once you introduced, in my opinion, the Borg Queen, you ruin the Borg. The mystery of the Borg and the threat of the Borg now go away, because now it's too relatable to me. You're giving me a queen concept that I can relate to. Now it's not so mysterious anymore. It's not as threatening anymore.
Well, yeah, you gave it a head that you can chop off and end the creature. Whereas before, when it was a distributed entity, you could just cut pieces off willy-nilly, and unless you exterminate every single last one of them, good luck to you.
And that's, to me, when they introduced Vecna, they did exactly that. They gave you a head that you could chop off, and it literally happened in the finale. And yes, I'm using literally correctly. The head of this monster was chopped off.
And it really bothered me that allegedly established in the play, and actually in the memories that Max encountered in the show, Joyce knew Henry. he actually was in a play that she put on in high school. So the fact that she chopped his head off there at the end...
I don't even think she knew him.
Without knowing... Yeah, it didn't seem that she knew that's who that was. So the fact that she killed him without knowing that this was Henry, that was terrible in my opinion.
Or was part Henry, because I've heard people try to... Well, it wasn't really a Henry, it was Henry mixed with the Flair, and it's like, yeah, but Henry was in there.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm just going to say this. I really wish that they'd been able to convince Henry to expel that mind flayer from him before he died, or to help him do so that he could have just been Henry when he redeemed and then let him die. Because otherwise, everything that Hopper said to Elle about, you know, her not getting to have a proper childhood and all that she's been through, that same thing applied to Henry.
Along the same lines as what we talked about with giving the Mind Flayer a head to cut off, this Dimension X / the Abyss, the fact that they made it look like what it was like a desert planet, and the Mind Flayer was this giant rock-looking spider thing, to me didn't fit in with what they set up before. Because when they introduced the wormhole idea, I was actually on board with that. The Upside Down being this bridge to this other place. But this other place, I would assume, was going to be some sort of non-corporeal, a place they would have no way of comprehending how it worked. But all it was just a desert planet. It was Arizona.
And where were the Demodogs and the Demogorgons? Did the Mind Flayer absorb them all to make its body or something like that there at the end? Because there wasn't a single one once Nancy and the rest of her crew entered the Abyss. There were none. They didn't encounter any.
I don't think there was any creature there but
the Mind Flayer and Vecna. Yeah.
The way they ended this did not work at all for me. This finale, every minute of this finale, I disliked strongly. And I have nothing positive to say. Even at the end, the lives that they gave the kids at the end there didn't work for me. I could go on about every single one of them and how I got a problem with what they were doing with those kids, but it doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, why does this matter? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't. I watched this show because it reminded me of the Goonies and Stand By Me and E.T. from the 80s. And so there was a nostalgia that kicked in, and I thought they did a pretty good job. And then it turned into a modern 21st century soap opera, essentially, is what it turned into. And it reminded me a lot of Lost. If any of you remember Lost from the 2000 noughts, it went from being about this weird, mysterious island to just a bunch of drama between Sawyer and I'm trying to think of the other two in that triangle. But
Kate.
Yeah, Kate.
And was it Shepard?
Yeah, that sounds right. And that was not much different than Nancy and Jonathan and Steve. How many storylines dragged on about that? No, I want to find out about the smoke monster. I want to find out about all this other stuff, the hatch.
I want to go down the hatch.
Like, I want to find all that. I don't care about this love triangle stuff. And that's exactly how I felt watching the Stranger Things stuff. It's just like I was watching Lost. And then finally, we get a 2-hour finale. And unlike a lot of people that were online, I wasn't crazy about how Volume 2 ended. But it seemed like they wrapped up all the irritating pieces.
We thought.
So I was like, okay, we're going to go into this 2-hour movie. All this relationship crap is done with. So now all they're going to do is concentrate on this story. Nope. They still brought and dragged in a lot of this relationship crap into this that I don't care about. I don't care about that. I have so many questions about what happened at the end here. And they spent the majority of their time with the coming out scene with Will, instead of spending their time on this 2-hour finale, which would have been the most important piece of the entire series, I would argue. They had a lot of things they had to explain in this 2-hour finale, and they didn't. They didn't explain really anything. So it just disappoints me. And I would not call this finale a disappointment. I would call it a train wreck. I would say that this is on par with the Lost series finale. I didn't watch Game of Thrones, so I don't know if Game of Thrones was worse or not, their finale. A lot of people say it was the worst finale ever. I'll take their word on it. I haven't seen it. But of the finales I've watched, it's the worst finale, at least on par with Lost and Battlestar Galactica. Disappointing doesn't cover those. To me, those are horrible finales. Series that actually did a good finale would be Star Trek The Next Generation, All Good Things. That was a decent finale. And Babylon 5, Sleeping in Light. That was another good finale, where it made sense that we ended up here. And this, Stranger Things, is closer to Lost than it is to Babylon 5, The Next Generation. And there are people that are just claiming that this is a disappointing. It was okay, but it was disappointing. No, this was a bad. For 5 years, this was a bad finale. It was just bad.
I enjoyed season 1. I enjoyed season 2, but not as much as season 1. I even enjoyed season 3. I actually liked seeing a 1980s shopping mall, even though it didn't really fit in with my idea of small town Indiana. Like, seriously. I enjoyed the Soviets underneath the mall, and I actually enjoyed the scenes in the Soviet prison. I enjoyed that. I didn't really care much for the whole California thing with the kids in season 4.
That's where it started losing that Indiana small town feel.
Well, they left Indiana, and I didn't enjoy the California stuff at all. The only part of season 4 that I liked was the Soviet prison. I'll just say that. Season 5 really didn't do much for me either. It's just, the show changed over time. It got far away from the original premise, which was, like I said earlier, 4 boys and a girl, and, you know, there's the supernatural thing that happened to them. And it's just a shame, because I will still go back and rewatch season 1 and season 2, season 3, maybe season 4. I'll just fast forward through the California stuff and just watch the Soviet stuff. But season 5, I'm not really sure I will ever watch this again. This was very disappointing.
Hopper, when he was in that car with Murray, and he was making some joke about he's been off like the alcohol and cigarettes for a while, and he said something like that. I forget exactly what it was.
Get drunk and smoke a bunch of cigarettes or something like that.
And all that stuff that he was doing with Elle, my interpretation of how this organically would have went is if Elle didn't come back, that should have broken Hopper, and he would have probably stuck a gun to his mouth and blew out his head. That's how it appeared like it was going to go down. It's a sad thing. I didn't want that to happen. That's why when Elle did what she did, I thought that was an extremely selfish move on her part, because it essentially told me she didn't really care about Hopper. She didn't care what's going to happen to Hopper when I'm gone. You know, she said the thing, well, I'm not Sarah. I guess in her mind that was, oh, well, he was only being nice to me because he was using me as a Sarah surrogate. So now that he knows, because I told him that I'm not Sarah, that everything's fine. It's like, no, you're a second daughter of his, and he's going to lose a second daughter, very similar to how he lost his first daughter. And what happened to him after his first daughter? This would be devastating for the guy. So for me, organically, what should have happened is Hopper should have offed himself after he came out of that upside-down gate. That's a horrible ending. I mean, I don't want that, but that's what organically what would have happened. What did she do to help Hopper out?
I hate ambiguous endings. The only thing I hate more than ambiguous endings is for it to be a dream or for there to be some sort of reset that it never happened.
Because they made this literally. Again, I usually hate this word if they don't use it correctly. But literally, it was a world, a planet that was being drug into our planet Earth. That's what it was. It wasn't a metaphorical this realm into this realm, which is how I interpreted it initially. It was just something as boring as one planet being yanked into another, which reminded me, remember that Mystery Incorporated Season 2 storyline where they had, was it Nibiru?
Yep, Nibiru.
Like, this was the Nibiru story from the second season of Mystery Incorporated.
Where were the Anunnaki?
Yeah, and Professor Pericles, I guess, was what? Vecna?
Vecna.
Vecna, yeah.
Yeah. And the Mind Flayer was that bad Anunnaki that was trapped in the crystal sarcophagus. Yeah.
And the Scooby Gang was the Stranger Things gang.
Yep. Yeah, well, again, I usually rewatch that series, and I always
was a literal planet coming down to go get us.
I always skip the finale. Planet X, that's what it was.
That's the story. If you haven't seen Mystery Incorporated, it's season 2. You got to watch season 2 because season 1 didn't cover this so much. Well, it did. It was an arc thing, but they didn't get into it till season 2. Season 2, if you've seen Mystery Incorporated from like 2012, I think it was, it's the same freaking story at the end as what this is. It's the same story.
Honestly, I felt that they did it better in Mystery Incorporated than in this. However, I didn't like the way that Mystery Incorporated ended.
They reset the whole universe so it never happened.
Yep, spoiler there. Sorry, everybody.
Nah, I'm not worried about that.
It's a show from like 2012. Like you just said, it's over 10 years old. So,
at least they didn't reset the universe here in Stranger Things. But as quickly as that town cleaned itself up, they might as well have just reset the universe.
Well, that's another thing. Because, so Elle disappears when the gate is closed. And the next thing we know, it is 18 months later, and the town looks like it's all fixed up, and even that store where Joyce used to work looks like it's back in business, and business is thriving.
Military, no presence that we saw at all.
Yeah, they're gone. So what happened to Dr. K, Linda Hamilton's character?
How'd those kids and everybody escape at the end before the 18 months later?
Yeah.
They were captured by the military and Dr. K. What the heck happened there? That seems kind of important.
Yeah, because I have a feeling she would have chucked all of them into the deepest, darkest hole she could find, and they never would have been let out. So that seemed not right. Well, also, what happened to Dr. Owens, Sam?
Yeah,
Paul Reiser's character.
Like he was captured, if I remember,
in season 4
by that military guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the last we saw of him.
Yeah, so what happened to him? Did he survive? Or did they kill him? Or is he locked in a prison somewhere?
Sarah Connor's character here, Linda Hamilton's character had no purpose in this series. None. They could have, that head military guy that Elle eventually got him to shoot himself, they could have made him the big baddie here. Other than Linda Hamilton's name to put in some sort of advertisements, she was useless. Her character served no purpose at all. She was generic military evil person. That was it.
And I'll be honest with you, I don't think they even really needed the military there. Maybe to, put up a big wall so that people can't go in and out of the Upside Down. Maybe have scientists in there investigating. But that whole Dr. K and all the pregnant women and trying to infect them, that just seemed like overkill. Why couldn't they have just been fighting demodogs and demogorgons and whatever the hell else Vecna and the Mind Flayer could throw at them? Wasn't that enough? They had to throw the military on top of it?
Yeah.
It just seemed like too much. And honestly, like I said, once they got into the abyss, like how many demogorgons and demodogs did we actually see in the finale? And I think the answer is 0.
Remember when Robin was trying to tell her girlfriend about what was really happening in that town? And that girlfriend was like, well, you're just crazy. And she was like, it reminded me, those of you who watch Doctor Who, when the doctor was talking to Donna Noble, and it was a Christmas special, and like the running gag in the noughts was that every Christmas some major Earth-threatening event was going to happen. So he was saying something like, well, I was there last year, it was right over there, and she's like, what are you talking about? That big world-ending event that almost happened. She's like, oh, I had a hangover or something. And so I'm thinking with Robin's girlfriend, and she was trying to explain the weird stuff happening, and this lady was like, well, you're just like weird. That doesn't make any sense. It's like you've got giant holes in your city where flames and devil fire was coming out, yet it's unbelievable to believe what Robin was telling you. Really? And And I know they kind of played it as a joke later, but even during that scene, it's like, again, you're wasting all this time. Why don't you cover something I care about in the mythos, not this garbage? Because she's eventually going to be convinced it's correct. Why are you wasting 10 minutes of time with this garbage?
Well, and again, in that finale, how much time did they actually spend with Vecna or fighting Vecna? Because the majority of that was either A, fighting the military, or B, like the last 45 minutes was nothing but 18 months later. Them graduating and their feelings and their futures.
Yeah, I think it was like 40 minutes of that was afterwards.
Yeah.
Where they were just all drawing out the saying goodbye crap.
Yeah.
You got 40 minutes. I got loads of questions about the mythos. Answer it. Well, that's going to be answered later in follow-up material. Not for me, it's not, because I'm not watching anything more made by Stranger Things people. I'm not doing it because there's no point.
I admit it. I'm going to watch that animated thing when it comes out. But again, that's stories that take place earlier in the timeline. And I'm just going to watch it just to see how it is. Who knows how it'll be? I don't know. It's probably going to be awful, but I'm going to try it anyway. Lord knows I don't have much else to do. But I can understand why people wouldn't want to.
I don't want to. What's the point? Look where the series ends up. It ends up here. So why would I want to watch anything else to fill out the mythos when it ends here? There's no way to fix the ending. They screwed up the ending. This is where it all heads to. So why would I care about the journey? Because that's that 2000 when those people were confronted who made Lost about the horrible ending. Their response to that was, well, it really was never about the ending. It was about the journey. Well, for some of us, we actually cared about the story. And the fact that you didn't wrap up Jack tells me that I don't want to watch anything more made by you people.
Well, their mystery boxes were all empty.
The J.J. Abrams storytelling, I swear the Duffer brothers must have attended that J.J. Abrams, was it a TED Talk or something, where he talked about the mystery box, because I swear that's what they did here, is all they did was mystery box after mystery box. Some of them they kind of answered, but mystery box after mystery box.
Yep.
And stupid people like me went along with it and thought it was going to be about the story, not the journey. Because I don't want to take the journey unless there's a story to go along with it. I'm fine taking the journey, but I'm not going to do it without a story.
Can't it be about both?
Apparently not. I was extremely unhappy with the ending here. We were debating before this finale, like maybe in 2026, we might have done our normal. What we usually do is we cover the first episode of a series, and Molly gives a synopsis of it, and then we kind of lay out how the series is going to go. We thought about doing that for Stranger Things, but I don't think I want to do it for Stranger Things because it ends up here, and I don't want to cover that. I mean, yeah, you could argue, like Earth Final Conflict, I only recommend the first season. We did a review of that. We very clearly stated we're only recommending season 1. You go after that, it's at your own risk. We could do that for this, but I don't want to. This has left such a bad taste in my mouth, and we've got Starfleet Academy coming up soon, and it's like, nah, I'm not doing that. We just wanted to jump on Mike and just discuss this. We don't know what sort of viewing numbers we would get on this, so we didn't want to really spend a lot of effort putting slides together, so that's why you're getting basically a static picture for most of this video.
Well, technically, Molly and the Old Man in Conversation is classified as a podcast anyway. So we figured, you know what? Just this once, let's just do the podcast.
Yep. I'm not recommending you watch the finale. For anybody who hasn't watched Stranger Things, you could watch the first season, and as long as you stop at the first season, I think you'll enjoy it. Molly seems to think that there's maybe a bit more to mine in the next seasons. But then you start investing time into this series, and then you got to be careful because now you're going to want to watch it Trainwreck. And I'm not willing to recommend you Trainwreck. That's why, if anything, I recommend season 1. Don't go any further because you'll just be investing time into something thinking it's going to lead to somewhere greater. Think of Lost. If you're old enough to remember Lost, this series so feels like Lost because Lost had some interesting good moments in it, but it really didn't pay off. And that's what this series is. It's the 2025 equivalent of Lost. And that's the best way to describe Stranger Things.
Yeah. One last thing I'll say was, I don't want to ever hear that Kate Bush song again.
Or Prince, for that matter.
I never really liked Prince. And you know what? Honestly, this was supposed to be in Indiana. And in the 80s, you know who was really, really big? John Mellencamp. Johnny Cougar, John Cougar Mellencamp. In fact, when I was in college, he lived in the same town. Everybody knew where he went and had dinner every week. You know, he was a huge presence.
Or even Michael Jackson, who was from Indiana. I mean, they couldn't afford to license that, but even Michael Jackson would have had a better 80s Indiana influence.
The show ended in the late 80s. Axl Rose is from Indianapolis, so they could have been leaning into the Guns N' Roses, especially with Eddie. They didn't. They leaned into that Kate Bush song, which I'll be honest with you, yeah, I am a little bit younger than you are, but I never heard that Kate Bush song before in my life.
You have now.
I have now.
Over and over and over and over again.
Yep. So if I were going to choose the soundtrack for making a show like Stranger Things set in Indiana in the 80s like that, yeah, that is not the soundtrack I would have picked.
John Cougar would have been a good choice. I agree with you.
Well, especially since to me it felt like this was supposed to be more south central to southern Indiana.
I don't think the Duffer Brothers have any experience with Indiana.
I don't think they've ever been there.
This is, at best, it's a small town setting, and they just said, well, let's throw a dart at a map and let's pick Indiana. Yet they did no extra research to determine, well, what was Indiana like in the 1980s? That's just my own personal opinion.
Now I'm going to have to go out and get my Breaking Away DVD out. And, I know that is set in the 70s, but at least it was actually filmed in Indiana, and it felt like Indiana, and it looks like the Indiana that I remember. So I'll just go watch that some more.
Next up for us is going to probably be when Starfleet Academy kicks off. So we're going to be dealing with that garbage. So I imagine that's our next true podcast, which will go back to our old format when we're covering that. So I guess until next time.
Go IU!
Hoosiers!